Peace, y'all. Today I want to deal with a source of information that a lot of people use to prove that the Portuguese Jews or the Iberian Jews are black. Right here we have a new voyage to Italy by François Maximilien Misson. Right? Let's get into it. Page 139 of the source. It says in the source right here, page 139, "'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black. For this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who marrying always one among one another, beget children like themselves, and consequently the swarthiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions. But the Jews who are originally of Germany, those, for example, I have seen at Prague, are not blacker than the rest of their countrymen." Right? So this English translation of Maximilien Misson is evidence for some that Sephardic Jews are literally black African-like people, right? So here's an article, right? Some people have encountered it. It's called The Jewish Blackness Thesis Revisited by Ron Hakohen, right? And this was written in 2018. This argument is addressed in this article about the Jews being called black. Now, some people I've seen have attacked this article by saying the person is a European Jew, therefore there's some kind of biasness, but we want to steer away from arguments like that. They're not the best arguments. Actually, they're very poor arguments. That's what you call probably a genetic fallacy, attacking the argument based on who it came from and not assessing the merits of the arguments. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm trying to keep it as short as I can. We're going to look at the merits of the arguments by Ron Hakohen and see if he's making a point, a valid point. So let's go down. Regarding Maximilien Misson, right? So right here, he's quoting Misson, right? Who died in the middle of the 18th, well, in the beginning of the 18th century, 1722, right? He says, the earliest example, Misson, whose ideas influenced Buffon's natural history, Misson's Travel's Guide to Italy is quoted in the English translation, and we read that already above, right? We read it here. So here he says, right? Clearly, Misson's argument against the notion that Jews were black, right? He argued against the notion that they were black, but this was just a minority position against the backdrop of the vulgar error to which he objected. The Misson quote, however, is a case of mistranslation. First, in the French, it is simply an error, not a vulgar one. More importantly, Jews are all black is a mistranslation of tous les Jews sont bassanes. All the Jews are swarthy, right? Similarly, are not blacker than at the end of the quote is in French, n'ont pas le tint plus bassane. Are not swarthier than. No blackness then, just swarthiness. So the quote is said to be a mistranslation. Does this counter argument have any merit? Let's see. So here we have, I tried to get the closest I could to the original date. I got earlier than the English translation. This is 1702 by Misson, right? And this is in the original language, which is French. So his work presented in its original language earlier than its English translation. We're going to go into that and we're going to see what it says, right? Of course, it's in French, so we'll have to do some translations, right? So this is the English translation. This is French. And on page 226, we see the quote, right? It says, tous les Juifs sont bassanes. I don't know if I'm speaking French correctly, so anybody that speaks French, y'all can read this, and maybe y'all could correct me if I ever get to talk to y'all. But this is page 226 of Misson's book, right? I put it in the translator, and the French to English translator for that phrase says all the Jews are swarthy. So a simple French to English translation confirms Cohen's article. Bassanes or bassane means swarthy. Now, of course, we know black people can be described as such, but if you watched any of my other videos, specifically the one where I juxtaposed the Iberian Jews who are called Swarthy at the same time being compared to actual black people, you'll see that it's not the case. They were dark according to what standard was back then, and maybe even today, because we see there are cases of Iberians being recognized as darker, but not by the standards of somebody of the African race or African Americans. To us, they would probably be either tan or just regular fair Europeans, but in their own minds, to themselves, Iberians seem to be darker than them. So so according to the original translation, it would actually come out as all Jews are swarthy, right? So right here we go back to Ra HaKohen's article, right? And we see up here where we read, right, it says, Patai, however, made it clear that it was Misson's view that Buffon adopted, not the so-called vulgar error. Indeed, in his monumental Histoire, and I'm sorry because there's a lot of foreign words, right? There's a lot of old words too. Histoire Naturelle, a very highly influential work translated into all major European languages, Buffon wrote, this time in an accurate English translation, that it has been pretended that the Jews who came from Syria and Palestine have the same brown complexion they formerly had. Matter of fact, I'm going to go to the primary source of Histoire Naturelle of Buffon. I'm going to go to it. But basically, the article is telling you that decades later, Misson's quote is directly referenced in a more accurate translation by Buffon, right? So let's just go to Buffon's work, right? This is page 262 of Buffon. This is from 1797. If you look at the bottom right, it has it. Barr's Buffon, Natural History, right? From 1797, right? This includes Buffon's work. And on 262, I'm gonna read from the bottom. It says, it has been pretended that the Jews who came originally from Syria and Palestine have the same brown complexion they had formerly. Brown complexion. It's not calling them Negroes or black Africans, right? It's saying a brown complexion according to their standards, right? As a lot of Iberians are called. As Misson, so now he's talking about Misson, right? And this is 1797. This is some decades later after Misson died and wrote. He said, as Misson, however, justly observes, the Jews of Portugal alone are tawny. So now we have the translation later on. They getting it closer to what it really meant, like swarthy or tawny, dark or darker, right? Tawny, as they always marry with their own tribe. The complexion of the parents is transmitted to the child, and thus with little diminution. Sorry if I butchered that word. Right? Preserved, even in the northern countries, the German Jews, those of Prague, for example, are not more swarthy, not black, but not more swarthy than the other Germans. So this is Buffon, right? He correctly quotes the proper translation of Misson. Okay, so here's another source by Jean Barbot, right? It's from 1746. It's a collection of voyages and travels, right, by Jean Barbot. It's page 9, the introductory discourse. And I'm gonna start right here where he says Marmol. He's gonna speak about this other author Marmol, and what he says about Ethiopian Jews. Right? So Marmol, in my opinion, assigns the best reason. The blackness of Ethiopians and other Sudi nations does not proceed either from the excessive heat of the sun or from the extreme dryness of their land, or other things assigned by astrologers. For if it were so, all blacks would turn white in temperate climates after 2 or 3 generations, and the Europeans in like manner would turn black in the Negro countries. But this experience testifies the contrary. This blackness in those people, the Ethiopians are those people, must therefore proceed from the blood or race, and it may perhaps be on account of the malediction of Noah on Ham, his disrespectful son. So we go down a little bit more, and this is Barbot speaking. That this blackness must be in the blood or race, as Marmol argues, can be further proved from this observation made, that the Jews of the Portuguese race, always marrying one with the other, the children resemble the father's and mother's complexion, and thus this particular tawny color perpetuates itself with little or no diminution where forever they inhabit, even in northern countries, whereas the German Jews, as for example those of Prague, are as white as most of their German countrymen, which shows what an era most people are in who think all Jews are tawny. Right? So in summary, over here I got Barbot quotes Marmol speaking on the blackness of Ethiopians. Marmol says their color is passed through hereditary, and Barbot then compares the Portuguese Jews and their tawny complexion as likewise inheriting their tawny skin through heritage and not climate. The Jews are described as tawny while Ethiopians are called black. So you see, he quoted Misson at the end of the sentence without really citing him, though his offering of Misson's text has tawny and not black. So again, when this was introduced to me, I think the person, they took the phrase that this blackness must be in the blood when Marmol was talking about the Ethiopians, and Barbot compared the black skin of the Ethiopians being passed hereditarily, if that's a word, similar to how the tawny or dark color of the Portuguese Jews is passed down hereditarily. I think he kind of put that together and thought that that Barbot is like literally saying that the Portuguese Jews are black. But Barbot actually, in his work, speaks about the Portuguese Jews or the Iberian Jews making mulattoes with black women from Angola in his text. So he's not making that claim. And here is Jean Barbot's book, Description of the Coast of North and South Guinea and the Ethopia Inferior, vulgarly Angola, by Jean Barbot, page 404, and we're going to read 408 right after this. The book is from 1720. By the way, the title of this actual book is it's extremely long. There's no way I could have included it. But this is going to talk about the actual Sephardic Jews and why he's not talking about them being literally black, right? Because of what he notes in his text as them actually doing with actual black people. So I'm going to read on the right side, right? And he's talking about, well, first, if you look, it says St. Thomas Island. And he talks about the island, and he begins to talk about the Portuguese here who discovered it in the year 1452, right? Then he talks about the blacks on the opposite continent, call it Pancos, right? And then if you go to the right side over here, he begins to talk about the Jews being kicked out of Iberia. And I'm going to pick up where it says, a few years after, such of those Jews as had escaped the malignant air, the climate, were forced away to this Isle of Saint Thome. There married to black women fetched from Angola in great numbers, with near 3,000 men of the same country. From those Jews married to black women, in process of time proceeded mostly that brood of mulattoes at this day inhabiting the island. Most of them boast of being descended from Portuguese, and their constitution is by nature much fitter to bear with the malignity of that air, right? So, we see that these Jews actually create mulattoes, right, with black women. So by process of elimination, these are non-black men, They were called Swarthy in history, but they were not black as in Africans, right? And they took black women and they created mulattoes. So I'm going to go to page 408 of the same source. Right? Barbot, 408. It says the islanders, still talking about the same place, right? The Jewish mulattoes in Sao Tome. Says the islanders are a mongrel people, as I have already hinted. White Portuguese descended from the first inhabitants of the island when it was settled. Portuguese mulattoes also descended from the proscribed Jews sent there at the beginning of the colony and married to black women sent from Angola. Both free, besides a vast number of blacks and mulattoes not free, right? Now, so here, just in case anybody got confused, I just added that to help out. Because there was a fellow that reached out to me and he kind of combined Marmol's talking about the blackness of the Ethiopian and then Barbot says that the blackness in his blood or race, as he argues, can be further proved from the observation made that the Jews of Portugal always marry each other. But he's comparing, yes, they're both dark in a sense. One is black, one is dark or tawny. So he deliberately says tawny, he doesn't say black or Negro. And in his own source, he does denote that the Portuguese Jews made mulatto descendants with black women in Angola, right? Right here, mulattoes here. And it talks about mulattoes there. And heck, I just add and throw in this source just to help out what Barbot says, just to give y'all a better idea, right? When he was talking about the mixing in Sao Tome. So this source I'm sharing in another video, but I'm gonna put this in here to help out. The modern part of a universal history from the earliest account of time, 1760, page 414, right? It says, talk about Sao Tome, right? It says up at the top, the consequence was that they supported the climate of St. Thomas without any great, is that word again, diminution of their number or inconvenience to those who survived. We are informed likewise that John of Portugal sold for slaves all those Jews who refused to embrace Christianity, and that after ordering their children to be baptized, they were transported thither, and there, from whom are descended the present race of inhabitants. Right, so the present people in Sao Tome as of 1760 are the descendants of Jews, right? Sephardic Jews who left Iberia, right? Because John of Portugal kicked out the Iberian Jews, right? And it says they are a kind of mixed descent between the swarthiness, meaning the Portuguese Jews were described as swarthy, right, dark, and atrabilious temperament of the Jews, and the more sanguine, plethoric habit and jet black complexion of the Negroes. So the Sephardic Jews are not called Negroes, they are called swarthy, right? Dark in their own way, but they created like mixed descendants between them, the swarthy Jews, right? And the more sanguine, plethoric habit and jet black complexion of the Negroes, right? So swarthy Jews are contrasted with jet black complexion Negroes whom they mix with. The Jewish swarthiness is not the same as the black African complexion. So if anybody were edified and found value in this presentation on the sources, I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Peace and love.